A person's economic rights have the ability to shape their entire life. The land one owns predetermines how they will make a living, and 35% of the population currently is dependent on agricultural labor. Owning and inheriting land ensures economic security and independence from exploitative and oppressive private farms and businesses. Women make up 43%, over 400 million of those who work in agriculture. Despite all this, they come to own only 16% of land as a result of unjust prejudices towards women, and have significantly less access to resources in comparison to their male counterparts, resulting to an average reduced yield of 20 to 30%. As of today, 15 countries still do not grant equal ownership rights between the sexes, while in 34 countries, daughters are inferior in inheritance rights. Meanwhile, in 35 countries, widows do not have fair inheritance rights. However, international action to provide women with equal economic rights is at an all-time high. Between 2011 and 2013, 40 countries had reforms concerning women's rights. In Côte d'Ivoire and Togo, women are now legally allowed to commence economic activity without the permission of their husbands, while in Mali, women now have equal inheritance and property rights. Furthermore, a study called 50 Years of Women's Rights, recorded from 1960 to 2010, found that economic growth, increased women in office, and participation in international conventions caused communities to enforce equal rights, recognize women as the heads of households, and allowed women exclusive control of their assets. In observed countries, the adoption of the UN Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women doubled the country's reform pace. Nonetheless, there is still progress to be made, especially in traditionally conservative communities. The 50 Years of Women's Rights study also found that countries' development in women's rights was geographically uneven. While regions such as Central and Sub-Saharan Africa saw a 50% improvement from 1960, more conservative areas such as the Middle East, South Asia, and North Africa had little to no change over the 50-year period in regards to women's economic rights. Many Islamic countries who enforce Sharia law see this inequality towards women. Islamic jurisprudence states that men will inherit 2 times what a woman does, and that men are economically responsible for women. Therefore, legal change in such countries is extremely difficult, as ultra-conservative groups believe the Quran is sacred and therefore its passages must be applied literally despite societal change. This can be seen in countries such as Jordan, whereas there has only been a 3% increase in women-held households from 1979 to 2015. However, protests in the Middle East have been occurring frequently in women's battle for equal property and inheritance rights. In Morocco, Asma Larambets resigned from the Moroccan Muslim Scholars due to her support of women's property rights, ignited protests against Morocco's Tassib law, which forces women to share inheritance with distant male relatives, regardless of public opinion on contemporary family size. The protesters asked for a review of traditional texts and adaptation to Morocco's modern economy, in which women play a substantial role. As a result, in 2015, the Morocco National Human Rights Council promised to review the nation's legislature. Furthermore, even in areas that did see legal action taken towards providing equal opportunities for women, customs and religious traditions largely prevented any significant change from occurring. In 90 countries, customs prevented women from having equal access to land. Tunisia, a leader in women's rights due to their 1956 Personal Code, nevertheless saw protests in March of 2018 concerning women's inheritance, which was heavily restricted by customary regional traditions. In nations such as Tanzania, Kenya, and Uganda, constitutions and land acts are progressive and ensure women's rights. However, these countries allow personal government by custom, and therefore prevent women from gaining large economic roles and equal inheritance rights. Insecure African land ownership comes from traditional beliefs that land is not a commodity, and as stated by Kenneth Tafira of the University of South Africa, land belongs to the living, the dead, and the unborn, making it inalienable. Therefore, a lack of clear constitutional law surrounding the ownership of land leaves the division of land to tradition-heavy, customary regional policy. Such constitutions see customs and traditions as ruling on property, marriage, and inheritance rights, and therefore cannot rule prejudices against women as discriminatory. Empowering women in these situations is therefore a complicated issue. An option is increasing international conventions in order to modernize heavy traditions, restricting the economic rights of women through collaborative international action, and educated women on their rights. The UN has taken steps in Afghanistan to combat women's lack of knowledge on their inheritance rights and the differences between national law and traditional customs. An increase of women's rights is not only beneficial to women, but to society as a whole. If more women could have ownership to agricultural land, the extra produce could eradicate 17% of world hunger, or 150 million people worldwide. Furthermore, in Nepal, children whose mothers sought equal economic rights were 33% less likely to be underweight. And in Rwanda, women farmers with equal land rights to men were 19% more likely to enact soil conservation. In Latin America and Asia, there was a 50 to 100% increase in productivity when using privately owned land. As stated by Mary Hallward-Driver, an economist for the World Bank, better rights for women lead to important development outcomes that can benefit a society as a whole. Upon addressing this issue, one must consider the following questions. How can traditions be preserved and respected when attempting to modernize an economy? How can societies manage the change that comes with the increased role of women in local economies? How can nations educate their populations of the difference between national law and customary traditions? What actions can be taken to help in progressing women's rights in areas that are not open to change in traditional ways? Can a government move away from customary rule and towards a more modern one with public support in a short period of time?